Proto-Indo-European, and I'm really happy to present Adam Scott to you. You already know him as one of the organizing team. He created those awesome t-shirts that some of you are wearing, and the website, and basically anything related to design. And he's also an expert on Proto-Indo-European.
You say expert.
Well, yeah, more than that.
So, let's give him a big round of applause.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. I'm not being rude when I look at my phone. All my notes are on here. This lecture was meant to be multilingual. I wasn't sure. Wer hier spricht Deutsch? Français? Italiano? Also vielleicht werde ich ein bisschen auf Deutsch sprechen. Et après ça, un peu en français, mais on verra. I guess we all know that languages are related to each other. So, if you speak Polish and then you go on to learn Russian, you know that you're going to get a lot for free. It's going to be easy. I was speaking to this guy about that last night. Okay. So, for instance, in German, nobody can deny that the word Vater relates to father, or Hand relates to hand.
Or hand.
You have an accent. No, nobody can deny that. We know that they come from a common source, and it's the same with Romance languages as well. So, he cantado en español, ho cantato in italiano, y he cantat en català. We know that they're the same. So, this e or o comes from avere, and the past participle comes from cantare. And of course, in these languages, the first person singular in the present tense is canto or canto. The orthography is exactly the same, there's no change. But what about similarities between different language families? So what about similarities between Germanic words and Romance words, or Russian words and Persian words? So here there's a couple of words. I'm sure many of you know stare, which is Italian, of course. Stehen, which is German. Does anyone here speak Gaelic? How would this be pronounced?
Ha.
Ha. Ha. Does anybody here speak Polish?
Yep.
What's this here?
Stać.
And what would be a good translation of that word?
Stand.
Stand. Okay. Any Persian speakers here?
Yep.
Okay.
Was not prepared.
What would this? How would you pronounce this Romanized Persian?
Istadan.
And what would be a good translation?
Stand.
Of course. So yeah, the languages are written underneath. They're all from different families, and it comes from we think, and everything that I say in this lecture is what we think. It's an educated guess at best, but we think it comes from the Proto-Indo-European. Stop. Now, this H sound is a kind of a glottal sound, and I'm learning Arabic at the moment, but I haven't perfected those those new sounds, but it's like sta.
Ich habe eine Frage.
Ja?
Ist es auch auf Deutsch später oder jetzt kann ich auf Deutsch fragen?
Du kannst mir fragen auf Deutsch,
okay.
ja.
Also meine Frage ist, du hast den Glottalstopp am Ende gemacht, aber dort H ist nicht am Ende, ist bevor der A.
Okay.
Also, ja, warum?
So, von was ich gehört habe, von was ich gelesen habe, ist dieses Wort so gesprochen.
Okay.
Dieses H, wurde in die moderne Sprache ein lange A bekommen. So ja, ich bin nicht ganz sicher, aber...
Schon als kleine Hilfe. Ja.
Ja.
In Arabisch gibt es kurze und lange Vokale. Die Vokale lange werden geschrieben, die kurze werden nicht geschrieben. Wenn du dich vorstellst auf Deutsch, dass du die kurze Vokale rausnimmst, dann kommst du auf die ungefähr die gleiche Sache. Das Problem ist immer, dass die Vokale in Wörtern nur Indizien, aber haben oft mit der Grundbedeutung des Wortes nichts zu tun, aber nur mit dem Kontext. Und entsprechend musst du die kurze Vokale immer rausnehmen, um den Stamm von einem Wort zu erkennen. Auf Arabisch ist es eindeutig.
Ja,
aber hier ist es gleich, wenn du das E von stehen weglässt, hast du wieder diese ST.
Donc on parle seulement d'un son, a sound. Es hat nichts zu tun mit die arabische Sprache. Es ist nur ein Klang, das existiert auch in Arabisch und existierte in dieser Sprache.
Well, I think the question was more that you pronounced it after the A rather than before the A, as it's written there.
Yeah.
So we or something rather than start.
Yeah. So when you say that the glottal stop is after the A, but you said that H represents the glottal stop.
It's like a glottal sound that comes from like up here.
Yes. But the H in the writing is before the A.
Yeah.
And in your pronunciation was after. So I was wondering why?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I'll be honest with you.
You're not fluent in Proto-Indo-European.
No.
Even linguists aren't sure how the H is pronounced.
Yeah,
because there are three possibilities.
Yeah, and I mean, what we know about the Indo-European pronunciation changes quite often because we find new things out one year that we didn't know last year. So
don't we have any native speakers of Proto-Indo-European?
It's a language in quick evolution.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a tree of the family. So it has like, and this is a simplified tree. I was gonna put like what we think is the complete tree on, but you wouldn't even be able to like pick out a word because everything would be so small. But you can see like Bengali is related to Irish and things like that. Something that, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago, before I knew anything about this, I would never think, oh, Bengali has something to do with Irish. This is what I was showing you earlier, how like the stat, that's how I'll say it, but we're not sure. This is like the descendants of it put into the family tree. So we have like stande in Icelandic, stat in Swedish. Store. My pronunciation is failing me today.
Oh, a ring on top of the A.
Ah,
Swedish.
okay.
Store. Yeah.
Okay. And from this word here, we have many English words that come from it, like stage, station, stay, situation. and stalemate.
Can I just point out something?
Sure.
In the Celtic languages you got there,
Yeah.
in the Gaelic and Irish, that the words you got there actually, for the present tense, the verb to be.
Yeah, which is interesting.
They don't mean to stand.
Of course they, yeah. However, stare in Italian doesn't mean to stand, but that's a verb that kind of does mean to be. And the Spanish estar comes from this verb, which doesn't mean to stand, but it means to be.
I just have to like, I'm not sure if in Polish, stat also means to become, but for example, in Russian, it could be stand and also become, which is related to be, so maybe here's the link.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not. I mean, my knowledge is within Germanic and Romance languages, so I can really confidently speak those languages. But as for Slavic and things like that, I'm not 100% sure. What were you going to say?
Also, this in no way implies that the Indo-European root word has anything to do with the exact meaning of the word in all of these languages today. The root is something much different than the contemporary meaning.
Well, sometimes...
Not much different, but it can't mean the same always.
Yeah, sometimes the meaning changes, and I mean sometimes it pretty much stays the same. Like, they're two opposite ends of the spectrum, and it could be anywhere in between. We don't... Well... So... So, where was Proto-Indo-European spoken? Well, Proto-Indo-European isn't a language that we can pin down like Hochdeutsch or something like that. It's kind of maybe a group of dialects, and certainly linguists would break down Proto-Indo-European into different dialects, and of course there were many PIE dialects. So to find out where Proto-Indo-European was spoken, what we do is we find that there were no words for things like beach, ocean, lion, tiger, camel, tent. And this suggested that they kind of lived in a landlocked area somewhere.
By beach you mean the tree, right? I'm just
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
the
not
tree.
a misspelled beach, but the tree, right?
Yeah, the tree, the kind of and then they had words for things like bees. So it kind of suggested a place with kind of a temperate climate. And we think
innovations that everyone didn't think.
We think that the language came from here, which is kind of modern Ukraine. And it was first spoken in this region from around 4,500 BC to 3,500 BC. But I don't want to get into it too much, but like other linguists have different estimations that differ by 1,000 years. So it's kind of difficult to say exactly. Then the initial spread. So can you see the color there? There's, yeah. So the
pinkish.
Yeah. There's actually another color here around here, but the color isn't so good. So it first spread around here. That took around 1,000 years, and then it spread to here again. This is around 2000 BC, where we first start to see kind of independent languages of Proto-Indo-European. I mean, now if you look on this modern map, the green here, like Proto-Indo-European is pretty dominant throughout the world. I think like 45% of the world's population speak a Proto-Indo-European language, which is pretty cool to say that it just came from around here and kind of expanded.
How many of it is English?
Well, yeah, I can see what you're saying.
But also Spanish.
Yeah, of course.
Portuguese.
And Russian.
And it doesn't.
Hindi et Bengali.
Yeah.
Non, en fait, les chiffres officiels disent que c'est le... bon, à part le chinois, ça fait 1 milliard et quelques. Mais sinon, t'as l'anglais à 800 millions. Ouais, comme langue maternelle. Hein. Ouais. Et l'espagnol, ça fait 400 millions. Et après, t'as encore Hindi et Bengali. Le Bengali, c'est à 150. Hindi, plus ou moins la même chose. Même si le Bengali est beaucoup plus petit. Mais voilà, donc, ouais, après le...
Mais bien sûr aussi, il y a beaucoup qui parlent le français en Afrique. Mais je crois que ici, le verbe, c'est seulement ceux qui parlent une langue indo-européenne comme langue maternelle. Mais il y a beaucoup plus. So, what were the main features of, or what distinctive features did the Proto-Indo-European language have? Well, it had the glottal stop, the glottal sound, sorry, that I was talking about earlier. And in modern languages, that's like completely gone, and we have a long consonant, like in starry or star. It had
consonant or a vowel?
Vowel, sorry. It had. You have a question?
Quand tu dis que c'est complètement, enfin ça n'existe plus. En anglais, par exemple, il y a phonétiquement, ou pas seulement en anglais, en allemand, parmi d'autres exemples, il y a aussi les glottostops. Oui, par exemple, avant tu as dit ba. Ça c'est un glottostop.
Je ne crois pas que
c'est pas
la même chose.
Donc, si la question, c'est on parle de phone ou de phonème. Donc, c'est un peu ça la question.
Ouais. Je suis pas sûr exactement.
D'accord, ok. Ouais.
I could say it in French, but I will not try to say it in French. The glottal stop exists in most of the Indo-European languages phonetically. When two phonemes, for example, are created into one word, for example in Polish, or when one phoneme, when one prefix is added to a verb, and the prefix ends with a vowel, and the stem of the verb begins with a vowel. So you have two vowels. You need to say a glottal stop between those two. But people do not write it down and do not understand that's really a glottal stop. But that exists phonetically.
Auch auf Deutsch, umarmen.
Yeah.
Umarmen.
And but in German,
umarmen is umarmen.
Yeah, it's in glottal stop.
Hey, let the guy give his talk.
Yes, maybe we can have the rest of the questions after the talk.
Yeah. Danach, wir können Sie fragen.
As I understand, the glottal stop was reconstructed for Proto-Indo-European. It may well exist, like in the.
It's not necessarily a glottal stop. It's a glottal sound. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's a sound that comes through here, like Arabic. So it had 7 cases.
Actually, you're missing one case that should be vocative on the list.
Really?
Yes, there were 8 cases. All European languages have lost at least one.
Right. Okay. So it had 8 cases. Obviously, like English, it doesn't have cases explicitly anymore at all. German has 4. One's kind of fallen out of use. Russian has 6 cases. It had 3 genders, like German. Obviously, English has no genders anymore. And like Romance languages have 2. So what did Proto-Indo-European sound like?
Wow! That's a dairy thing.
I wish I was going to say this, however...
That's an old version.
Yeah.
Well, this is what I was going to say. So we get new information all the time as to what it might have sounded like. So this is that was actually the first version that I showed you there. There's been like maybe 10 revisions of that since the original. Do we just have the sound from my laptop?
Yeah, right now there's no other speakers available.
Okay, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, maybe give the link for people to listen to it on their own computers later.
Yeah, we'll figure something out. I mean, if you just type in like what did Proto-Indo-European sound like, you can bring up the thing and have a good listen to it. So yeah, as I was saying, like most of the things that I've said today are like an educated guess, and now it's the bit that you're waiting for. You can ask me questions.
Just going to add something. An interesting thing about this version of the Proto-Indo-European is it looks a lot like Sanskrit to me, and it sounds like Sanskrit, and Sanskrit is one of the oldest written Indo-European languages we have, so it kind of illustrates quite nicely the influence having a writing system has on kind of sustaining language, because that's what seems to be the case.
Actually, the reason that it's like that is because when they wrote this version, then they were relying more on Sanskrit because they knew it's the oldest Indo-European language written they had. Yes, and old Sanskrit mainly had A's. I don't think it had very many other vowels. It had a vowel A, so they thought, okay, we should like reduce everything to A. So then they've got loads and loads of A's, and if you look at more recent versions, they've got a lot more vowels than that. Everything is like in that. Because that was like one of the first versions. Like every few years they update it, and it looks completely different. Also, sorry, to add about the geography thing, like Ukraine is like, so this is Maria Gimbutas's idea, the Ukrainian linguist, that they were, because kind of the question is, you know, how did they actually spread the language? So because they have the word for wheel, which is shared between different European languages, then they thought, okay, maybe they like went around on chariots, and this is called the Kurgan hypothesis, because they have these funeral sort of graves called kurgans, which they thought this is probably what the Indo-European culture was. So they traced these and they thought, okay, they probably came from Ukraine and like conquered everyone with chariots, and then as like a sort of super language, like everyone ended up like learning it because they were kind of colonial and they were like took over everyone. But then since like there have actually been several other theories about coming from the Balkans, theories about coming from Anatolia, because also you have the Hittite language, which is a sort of sister language to Proto-Indo-European. You have several other like Luwian and other languages, dead languages from Anatolia, which were in this family. So yeah, then different people try to support two different things, and it's quite hard to pin down archaeology to language because they don't actually share. I mean, there's no writing for that film. You know, it's like a good 10,000-year-old language, and you have money of writing much later. So then there was some recently some more evidence provided by doing computational studies of like Bayesian analysis of like how languages change. So they could try and say like which languages are more related to which, and then how long they expected it would have taken. It was done by some researchers in New Zealand and the University of Auckland, and at least their study provided evidence for a certain date, which is more in line with the date that people give to the Anatolian hypothesis that Indo-Europeans started in Anatolia, which is
connected with the development of agriculture. So the idea is that they started with agriculture and then that spread gradually to other places, and then they started taking on the agricultural culture, so to speak, and also the languages, or the language. So, so there's a kind of competing, like the chariot idea, the conquest idea versus the gradual economic domination through agriculture idea, and some people have tried to link them together as like, first they went up to Ukraine and then they conquered everyone, as well as so there are a few different ideas with the homeland thing, like a lot of people have given up hope on because they think like there's no way they're ever going to figure this out. But there are a few different ideas of where it came from. Generally they just aim for the middle and then try and justify themselves.
Yeah, well, as I said, like, it's what we think, and there are like many competing theories on Proto-Indo-European, and many people would disagree with like lots of things that I've said today. And even the text here, like, this is our best educated guess, and maybe Proto-Indo-European people would understand it, but I think they may have said it maybe slightly differently.
Do you have the newest version of the
I don't have it. But
what do you think of it? Do you know it?
It's on Wikipedia.
Yeah. It is on Wikipedia, yeah.
And what do you think of it? Do you think it likely that it has sounded like it? Because there are actually 3 sounds that are not reconstructable in the global sounds.
Yeah.
And what is your theory about them? Do you have one?
I don't necessarily have one because
you were too lazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Sure.
The pattern seems to be that we've just lost all of these grammatical cases.
Yeah.
And I guess that's because everyone just hates grammatical cases.
Except the Russians.
Except
and the Lithuanians.
And the Hungarians.
It's like they have no. Well, they use some of these grammatical cases. Has anyone actually gained some new grammatical cases or anything, or is it just like we're all losing grammatical cases? And if we're all losing grammatical cases, how did they appear in the first place? Did someone just like impose them to torture people?
There is actually a grammatical case in Old Irish, because originally they only had vocative in the singular, but Old Irish developed vocative in the plural, so that actually was a development of a case rather than a reduction of a case. So that is one case. when the case was expanded. Yeah, that's the only one I can think of.
And then a few languages of India, like Hindi, have an ergative case which was not present in
Hindi has an ergative case?
I think so. Yeah.
But like, obviously the trend is that like languages lose complexity as they evolve.
Well, that is the theory, but there's another theory that they lose complexity again as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of like
don't talk everyone at the same time, please.
I'd like to make a couple of points. The first is that not everybody hates grammatical cases. Apart from some masochistic polyglots who love them, native speakers are not bothered by grammatical cases. If you learn a language from your childhood, you just learn the grammatical cases, and they can become more and more complex. If you have a small, isolated language community, the language becomes more and more complicated. It doesn't become simpler and simpler. It's when you have second language learners learning a language that it starts to become simplified, and that's why the big lingua franca of like English, for example, becomes simplified because you have lots of adults learning it imperfectly and simplifying it, like the Vikings learning English, and you know, we'll drop these cases because we understand each other, right? Or even the Celts learning English when the Anglo-Saxons came to England also influenced and simplified English in many ways. So you've got a double process going on of complexification when a language is isolated, which is why you have such complicated languages in the Caucasus, for example, and simplification in languages like English or Persian, where you have a lot of second language learners taking part in
and
the
also
process.
where languages historically meet, where they're not isolated. There's a lot of simplification among all of these languages that meet.
Well, I mean, when they meet, it's not languages.
Well,
languages never meet.
They
It's
don't meet,
language
but I mean, it's
speakers.
language exactly.
Speakers that meet,
Exactly.
right? So they're learning each other's languages and simplifying it.
Exactly,
The process,
that's more
sharing
correct.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
What about political consequences in modern time of like new scientific discoveries in Proto-Indo-European?
Namely, is there a Proto-Indo-European party?
I mean, not really. I mean, some people do think that they want to kind of learn Proto-Indo-European as a language, and like some people start and then they kind of get into it and realize that it's not possible. Well, it is possible, but the Proto-Indo-European you learn today, it could be completely different in a year. So it's not really a living language in that sense. It's just something that's interesting to look at in terms of its descendants, I think.
And that was actually more what my question was about. Like, did we develop, like Europeans, more of a friendship towards people living in India, for example, speaking another Indo-European language as a consequence? Like, did we gain more respect, for example, for Sanskrit?
I don't know. I think very within the language community, maybe we know that these languages are related, but like a general person probably thinks that Persian is as far away from English as Arabic is.
I don't see that corresponding to history or the current state of affairs in Europe, let alone Europe.
Right.
The conflicts, the small conflicts that people have from one village to the next, let alone between cultural groups in Iberian Peninsula, and then people within Italy and what they think about each other. They speak the same language, even though it's not. And then, like all these conflicts, I don't think they have anything to like. People know their languages are related, and they still seem to treat each other.
Russia and Ukraine, the two languages are pretty similar, mutually intelligible, but they're still fighting. So yeah.
Back from politics to linguistics. I've always wondered, in that sentence, the first sentence, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth word, what is its function? I mean, asked must be something with is, and the whole sentence means it had no wool.
Yeah.
Well, what is the are doing there? Because na is probably the negation, and asked is has or is. So what is the are doing there?
I don't know. What I thought about this, and I thought it may be some kind of auxiliary verb, like in English how we say I do eat. Like.
Is that even probable? I mean, it's very unique in English that dummies can do dummy.
Yeah.
So is that even probable that such a complex language had an auxiliary verb? Is that possible? I don't think so.
Definition, if it's so complex, why wouldn't it?
Well,
do you have a theory?
I don't. How should I? No, it's just, I was wondering why it's there, and maybe you know it since you showed it.
First of all, auxiliary verbs are not unique to English, and the fact that it's present in many European languages proves that it's likely. I mean, I don't know how likely that proves that it's possible.
But the do dummy is actually very unique. You know,
yeah, well, this is one unique case, but then that's there can be other cases as well, right? So,
but I mean, it may have kind of the function of an auxiliary verb. Yeah. Sure.
You tell us that la recherche, tu dis que la recherche change de l'année à l'année. Je voulais demander quand est-ce que le terme proto-indo-européen est apparu. Parce que dans le Moyen-Âge, il y avait le latin et les langues locales. Plus tard, il y avait...
Tu veux savoir quand l'idée de proto-indo-européen est apparue?
Oui.
Oui. il y a environ 200 ans, je crois.
A bit earlier, I think.
Ouais.
C'est qui a commencé avec ça?
250 years or something.
Who started with that?
It was. I've forgotten the guy's name.
Okay.
But basically, he noticed similarities between Sanskrit and Greek and Latin, which hadn't been previously noticed.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of gave birth to this whole Proto-Indo-European studies idea. Sure.
That person could be Sir William Jones?
That's the
yes.
guy.
Can you repeat it, please?
Sir William Jones.
So,
William Jones.
Sir William Jones.
English.
Well, he was Welsh and he never learned Welsh. I'm Welsh.
Sure. There was a question about learning Proto-Indo-European in modern times. So this might be interesting for people who are interested in constructed languages or anything. But yeah, when looking for stuff about Proto-Indo-European, I bumped into a textbook online of Proto-Indo-European it was a textbook like like teach yourself Proto-Indo-European. The same you get French in whatever 3 months. Right. So it was actually there was a textbook like that. Someone had just decided, okay, well this keeps changing because people keep on finding more finer details in terms of how this language was originally apparently spoken. So we're just going to take what it has now and standardize it, and then just write a textbook of it, and then we're going to try and convince people that the EU should use this language. So I found such a textbook. It does exist if you're interested. Maybe you can support that effort if you want.
Yeah, I can post the link to the thing on the Facebook page, I guess. Sure.
Maybe it's a little bit off topic, but anyway. Can you help me and go back to the first slide?
With the Germanic roots?
Yeah, like the and.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I read ice and ice, I directly translated to Portuguese and I got gelo, which is not similar to ice and ice. But then I started realizing, thinking if it's maybe related like gelo. I know that's good, and it's an assumption. Maybe it's related to cold, and then in Slavic language, like cold, or maybe someone can helada. Helada. What language?
I don't think the claim on this slide is that ice has a Proto-Indo-European root, necessarily. I mean, it has a Proto-Germanic root, clearly. But that could have been borrowed from Finno-Ugric or something, which is quite likely in the north of Europe. So you wouldn't necessarily expect it to have a reflex in Portuguese.
You were just highlighting the similarity between
languages.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
And if we translate gelado to French, it's glacé, which looks like gelato, and glass, ice. So if you take notes, it's like Portuguese took the first part, French took both, and that's the end of the part.
I mean, I think ice and probably does have a common Proto-Indo-European root, because especially words like these, which are common, generally.
Oh no, actually now I'm convinced that it's related to cold, because geladeira, which is a refrigerator, have the D in Portuguese, geladeira, and then the cold and followed. Yeah, probably.
Sure. Sometimes the differences between modern languages are conceptual, right? They're cultural. Their concept of what ice, gelat in Catalan is a past participle. I mean, if you take it to its origin, it means frozen. So so these differences sometimes are cultural. They're not from the same root word initially because they conceived it in a different way.
Yeah, that's true. But
in some of these cases.
Yeah, but if you kind of trace it back, they probably will have the same root, because if you look at, I mean, all these words, they're kind of like, they differ quite a bit. So it's probable that the word ice in the different PIE languages differs quite a lot, but it's from the same source. It's normally words which are kind of more exotic that are borrowed from completely different language families.
Sure. I'm not sure if it's under the scope of this presentation, but I'm curious whether there's a theory on the appearance of grammatical features like articles. That's very common in parts of the Indo-European language family, but not in the others.
Yeah, so partly this is, sorry, I don't know if you have, so like in a lot of these things, this has been like specifically studied. So like in Latin, for instance, you had ille, illa, illud, which means like that or something, and then that turned into il and le and el and stuff like that. So that's actually, you often get certain features turning into other features, and sometimes you also get like weakening of certain originally like emphasized words, and then they join together to make a new word, which is a really cool thing called grammaticalization. So, for example, you have a really good example actually in Romance languages. So you have in Latin you have cantabimus, which is like we will sing, but then they started to say something like cantaga habemus, which is like we have to sing. But then that got linked, cantaga habemus, kind of the in-between bit got weakened and it turned into cantaremus, which is actually how it sounds like in like most Romance languages now. So that word, which was originally a separate word, it was linked together, so now you had a new grammar with a new future tense, and the whole future tense got weakened and disappeared. And now you get things like voy a cantar, sorry, and je vais chanter or something like that. So that's like a new one, right? Which maybe in like, I don't know, but like, you know, maybe in 1,000 years, right? That will join together into like or something, right? And that will be like the new future of French, or the new future tense of French, and there will be a new future in Spanish. And actually, if you go back to the original cantabimus, that appears to have turned up from cantar, which is the the singing, and plus bimus is like it's quite clearly an Indo-European being. It's like to be, wait, bitch. Bute, like all these different languages, they all have the same, or Budan, they all have the same like infinitive of very often of to be. So then that's like it appears to be like I will be singing was the original, which was grammaticalized like more than 10,000 years ago. So like over several thousands of years, you get these things like joining together to make new grammar.
Well, I think in the Romance languages, it's like they're adding the they're conjugating the equivalent of the verb avere, so the French would be avoir, and then they stick it on the end of the verb, so chanterai, and then in Italian it's o, so canterò. Sure.
Going back to that, voy a cantar, je vais chanter, in Catalan it's, what is it? Vaig cantar?
That means I sang.
Exactly. Why?
I go sing, because the auxiliary verb for the past is that verb.
But they say he cantat també. You can say he cantat.
If you sang today or this week, but yesterday vaig cantar, or last year vaig cantar, or l'altre dia vaig cantar.
Why? How did they even come to that?
Well, why do we okay, so this is the
any other language which is related to that.
But you can say vaig a cantar, well, a cantar, which isn't good Catalan.
It's not at all.
But it doesn't indicate the future.
Good to know.
So
I go to sing, but then you would say man vaig a cantar.
You've got an example of this grammaticalization going on in English at the moment with going to becoming a future marker, a marker of the future tense. Going to is being contracted to gonna, and you can only use gonna if you're using it in this going to sense of forming the future. You can't say I'm going London tomorrow. I'm going to London. It's only in that particular grammatical context of being a future tense marker. And what you can note as well is that with going to, the original meaning was kind of locative. It had to do with movement in space, right? But because when you go somewhere, there is often a purpose, and that purpose is fulfilled at some point in the future. Then you get the movement in space becoming changing. The semantics changes to a movement in time, which is something similar to what's been going on in the Romance languages.
Yeah, I think this happened in Romance languages as well, when they were using the verb avere to denote possession, and they do that in French, j'ai quelque chose, but of course in Spanish, Catalan, and in Portuguese, in Portuguese they use tener, well, not Portuguese, but in Spanish and Catalan they're using tener or...
You can use it as an auxiliary. In French, tenir, das heißt halten.
Yeah, so...
Posséder et avoir, das heißt, tener ist tenir, und c'est une même famille de verbes, et l'autre c'est la possession réelle, je tiens dans la main, et la possession virtuelle, j'ai. Et le être, je suis grand, c'est aussi quelque chose que j'ai, mais c'est à nouveau une variation de la possession. Et la possession réelle, la possession intérieure, la possession dans la main. Et c'est là qu'il y a toute cette nuance de verbes modaux qui explique ce que, en fin de compte, on est précis sans s'en rendre compte. Les Espagnols différencient la possession réelle de la possession virtuelle.
So this is, if I understand correctly, you're talking about conceptual differences about how these people perceive their use
in
of...
the hand, in you, or in your mind.
Yeah.
It's a different form of possession.
Okay, exactly. Thank you.
Okay. Sein und haben sind auch, enfin, pardon, en français, ou en français, anglais, allemand. Anglais is performing very good. But to be or to have is synonym in some situations.
Yeah.
And it is only variation of the same word.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question or comment before we have to go down to lunch.
I just want to add to what this gentleman just said about kind of new forms of appearing. After your comment, I just realized we can see this happening in front of our eyes with in certain colloquial speech, we say Anna, right? Anna. Something, and that's, I guess that's fairly recent, and I just thought it's cool that we can see grammatical evolution.
Another example from English is the way in which we used to have thou and you as the singular and plural of the second person. Thou disappeared, but a need arose to be able to express the second person plural to distinguish between, and so you get things like yous in the north of England, or y'all in the southern states, which is becoming grammaticalized to a new pronoun.
Or yes, where I'm from, my mother. I love yes, love yes.
Love yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.